I know that election integrity is a big topic that you've covered through the years. I'm curious first, just to start again, just to go slow with the audience, is there a difference between election fraud and voter fraud?
Yes, there's a critical difference. So if a single voter, let's just say a guy who lives in Georgia, moves to Arizona, but and because our systems are antiquated, his name will remain on the voter rolls in Georgia. But now he moves to Arizona and he registers there. He's now registered two places. And he decides, guess what? Both are swing states. I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris in both Arizona and Georgia. That's voter fraud. He's not allowed to do that. Could be, in theory, prosecuted, although it's very rare for that to happen. But that's not going to tip the election either in Arizona or in Georgia. However, so voter fraud is episodic. It's the individual voter somehow gaming the system. Election fraud is coordinated. And election fraud is the concern because election fraud is aimed at delivering, in general, large numbers of votes, sometimes in a single state, but otherwise across a bunch of states, in order to tip the election. That is its objective, and it's organized to that purpose. Election fraud has been occurring in our country at various levels for a long time. In the 19th century, the Democrats had election fraud with new immigrants. They'd come off the boat. They'd basically hand you a bottle of vodka and say, listen, go see my cousin Gus. He'll find you a place to stay. And by the way, here's a ballot. If you sign here, don't worry, we'll fill the rest of it out. This kind of stuff is not new in American history. I think it was ramped up under COVID. And our system remains very vulnerable to fraud in many different ways. Just to give a simple example, right now, if you were to request an absentee ballot, and remember, absentee ballots are by definition much more vulnerable than a normal ballot. Because in a normal ballot, you have to go in there, you go behind a curtain, they give you a ballot, there are people watching. It's not easy to cheat. And if you were to say to the guy in the counter and said, hey, listen, I got something really urgent. I got to go run an errand for 3 hours. Let me take my ballot with me. I'll bring it back all filled out and give it to you. They'd be like, you can't do that. But that's basically what absentee ballots are. They mail you a ballot. Now, here's the point. When you get a ballot in the mail, you open it up and you look at it, you'll notice that it doesn't have a watermark and it doesn't have any identification number. It is just printing on a piece of paper, a certain type of bonded paper. And that's your ballot. So right away, you can see that a ballot inherently has much less security than, let's say, a $20 bill. Because that ballot can be manipulated, counterfeited quite easily, and there's no built-in checking mechanism. For example, the only checking mechanism is a kind of signature verification, which in practice is meaningless. Untrained people operating within a space of a second or two look at the signature on the envelope. Then they look at a signature on a computer, which is very often your application for that ballot, and they just look to see if there's a rough match, and then they go to the next ballot. So this is the extent of the integrity of our system, and absentee ballots are now a big part of it. So it's a very vulnerable system, and a lot needs to be done to fix it.
Is that a serious concern of yours for the 2024 election?
The type of election fraud depicted in one of my earlier films called 2000 Mules, which came out in 2022 and was an examination of the 2020 election, it used both cell phone geo-tracking and surveillance data to monitor fraud in 2020. By the way, two very reliable technologies that both have the ability to kind of take you back to what happened on the ground in the days leading up to the 2020 election. I think that particular type of election fraud depicted in that film would be difficult to replicate now. It involved sort of mules or vote traffickers going to ballot boxes, mail-in drop boxes, in the middle of the night, typically with backpacks full of ballots, sometimes wearing latex gloves, habitually taking photos of the ballots going into the box. Now, if you tried that this year, because of the exposure of 2000 Mules, millions of people know about it. There will be patriots and citizens looking for it. And so I don't think you could pull it off. I'm worried about new forms of gaming the system. And precisely, this is like Fort Knox that is vulnerable in 6 different ways. There's a back door left open, and there's also a way to get in through the roof. So most likely the bad guys, if they're trying to cheat in 2024, and I think it's going to be harder for them than in 2020, but they will try new ways to cheat.
I see. So what if when you talk about new ways, like what are the new ways? What are you most concerned about? And what's the viability of it really?
So there's one new way that is depicted in my latest film, which is called Vindicating Trump. And the section in the film and an accompanying book of the same title is called The Ballot Makers. So let me describe that in a minute or very briefly.
Please.
It goes like this. I hired a couple of investigators to look into this, and they came to me and they said, Dinesh, we know a way to make ballots. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm kind of not an expert, but at least I know a lot about this issue of election fraud. I've never heard of this. How do you make ballots? And they go, I said, I thought that you get ballots from the state, right? You're voting in the state of Texas or the state of Maine. You request an absentee ballot. That's the only way to get a ballot. And they were like, well, guess where the state of Maine gets ballots from? They order ballots to a particular specifications from printing companies that make ballot stock. And as it turns out, those printing companies sell that ballot stock on the open market. You can request ballot paper for you can order 100,000 copies of ballot paper. And I go, well, that's just the paper. They go, yeah. Now just go to your state and request an absentee ballot. And the absentee ballot will have all the information of a real ballot. It doesn't even say sample ballot. It's not a sample ballot. It's your actual absentee ballot. Then go down to your local printing store, or the UPS store or whatever, take your ballot stock, and then take this absentee ballot and just copy the ballot onto that paper, and you will have in your possession 10,000 valid ballots. All those ballots are in proper stock. They will be counted by tabulators if you put them in the printer. All they're missing is a name and a signature. And so we go on from there. Step by step in the film, I show you essentially how you can make ballots, fill them out, and in fact, until you drop those ballots into an absentee, into a mail-in drop box, you're not even breaking the law. You're allowed to do it, and it's only when you, quote, cast your fraudulent vote that you have done something illegal. So all of this is very disturbing because it shows, as I say, the vulnerability of our system. Now, in the latest film, I'm not showing you a system that has been, to my knowledge, widely used, but I'm showing you what I would do if I was going to try to cheat in the 2024 election. This is a very easy way to do it. And my reason, of course, for exposing it is not to educate cheaters, but rather to bust the scheme before it's tried.
So it's feasible because anybody, you and me, can print the ballots.
Yep.
But then the issue becomes whether or not we can penetrate into the tally process, into the counting process, right? So I need to get those ballots into the drop box. And you're saying at that point in time, most people they're not very secure. Most people aren't going to see, they won't recognize the fraud, correct?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that you can go to the Secretary of State's office in your state, and for about $50, you can buy the voter rolls. You can buy the entire list of people in your state or county that have voted or not voted. You can go down those voter rolls and see who's on the rolls, who hasn't voted, let's say, in the last 3 elections, right? That guy's unlikely to vote in this election either, but he's on the rolls. Now, he could have moved. He might even be dead. They haven't taken his name off the list. Or he's a live voter. He just hasn't voted. He's lost interest in voting. What you can do is now take that guy, fill out his name onto this ballot that you've made, scrawl his signature, just do a scrawl, and then take that ballot and if you cast it, there's a 99% chance that that will be counted as a valid vote. There is no built-in system for saying, wait a minute, this guy's on the voter rolls, but this is not that guy. We have no system in place to detect that as a fraudulent vote, as it surely would be.
Dinesh, I have a legal degree. I was admitted to the bar in New York, New Jersey, and waived into DC. And I have to tell you, I do not remember ever learning anything about the fact that any average person, any citizen can have access to an entire state's voting roll. Where did that come from? This is the first time I'm hearing it, admittedly.
Just go into Google and ask, how do I get the voter rolls from my county? Type in the name of your county. I do not know of a single place in the country where you cannot do that. And I know of innumerable places where you can. It's part of what is made available to citizens. You can go and get the list of the voter rolls of people who have voted and not voted. That's made available as basically on public request for a nominal fee.
So this underscores my point with regards to the need for emerging technology. I mean, blockchain technology would be a great way to defeat that issue. There's no doubt about it. Dinesh, in practicality, though, I just heard a mayor from Arizona talking about the fact that he believes the Arizona ballots won't be counted, and Arizona will not be ready to provide their results until 2 days after Election Day. So I would imagine that the additional time could create confusing situations of the nature that you're talking about, more fraud. What do you predict will happen in the days and weeks following Election Day?
I'm not sure. I will say that the reason that this is disturbing, this whole it's going to take 5 days or it's going to take 6 days, is because by the end of Election Day, you know exactly how many votes you need to tip the election. So what that means is that you can now discover that, hey, listen, because if you had to guess at the beginning, you have no idea, right? If you want to, let's just say, do fraud and win the state of Georgia, you have no idea what the margin is going to be. You have no idea. It turns out in 2020 the margin was 12,000 votes. So let's say you say, okay, well, I'm going to cheat 20,000 votes. That may not be enough. That's actually a very small margin. And if Georgia goes by 100,000 votes, let's say for Trump, well, your cheating is to no avail. The 20,000 votes didn't make a difference. So you don't know. But if for some reason a state goes, we're gonna take absentee ballots and overseas ballots 3 days after the election, then you know exactly what's needed. And so this is very troubling because there's no need for it. There should be no reason you can't count these votes beforehand. Every other country, or at least lots of countries, are able to do it. Large countries like India, which just had an election, a lot more voters. Nevertheless, election results are delivered by the end of the night. So it's a troubling sign that an advanced democracy like ours cannot deliver those results. Now, I think Republicans and Democrats differ psychologically in this election in this way. Republicans, if you tell Republicans you lost an election fair and square, Republicans by and large will be begrudgingly, well, okay, we don't like Kamala Harris, but you know what? She made it over the finish line. We're just going to have to dust off and do better next time. Democrats will freak out even if they think Trump won legitimately. They're not freaking out because Trump stole the election. They're freaking out because it's Trump, and they don't want to accept that result. So I'm worried about a little bit of civic unrest following the election. But as I say, the civic unrest will not come from Republicans. Republicans will not say Kamala Harris won fair and square, and therefore we're going to riot. But it's quite possible the Democrats will say Trump won fair and square, and that's all the more reason why we're going to riot.